You meet people every day. You forget their names, forget their faces. Occasionally, you meet persons. You remember their names and faces. And especially when you see and hear them through the magic of film.
Hooray for Hollywood, that's Dewey Valley, Hooly Hollywood.
For 45 years, one man rode on the magic carpet of film. That's what he said. 45 years of creative adventures, excitements, and an occasional accomplishment that exalted me to walk among the peaks. His name and his title still work magic. Frank Capra, director. I want to welcome you here, Mr. Capra. We're delighted to have you. It's been very instructive already, and I know it will continue to be. I'd like to introduce, first of all, Steve Myers and Larry Estes, two students who will help me in asking you a few questions, and then maybe later on we can have a few questions from the audience.
Fine. Sounds great.
We were talking earlier about various times in the history of the films when times were especially productive, when good films were being made in large numbers. And I think at that time, when we were talking before, you said something about maybe the late 30s being a strong period. Would you care to elaborate on that?
Well, it's purely an opinion, I guess, and it's an offhand opinion. I have no real basis for it. But I remember that the Academy Award nominations were awfully strong. There was a whole list of maybe 5 or 10 big box office films and really big films that came out almost every year. But you could tell by the quality of the nominations. It represented the quality of the product of those years, and that before that, and maybe a little after that, 1 or 2 films might stick out way out, but not 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 as there seemed to be in that 5 or 6 years between 1935 and 1940.
That was the height of the studio period, probably, then. I guess that and into the 40s.
Into the 40s, and of course, after the 40s, war came along, and that just opened everything up because the theaters were just filled with anything that you could run. And the quality went down during the wartime because you didn't need quality. What you needed was fast films. You turn out fast and not too long, because they needed the turnover to take the crowds out of the theater. It was a boom time for theaters in the wartime. Anything went. Mm-hmm. So we had to recover from that afterwards, and it was quite a bit of time before we recovered and before quality crept in again. It was quantity time in Dixieland as far as wartime was concerned. Boom time. Anything went. One theater manager, I heard him say, says, well, all we had to do was open the doors and duck, and it didn't matter what kind of junk we played on the screen. And this, of course, is doesn't lead to quality, and film suffered for a while for that, because of that. And it picked up again in the late 40s and 50s.
Well, the industry has had a number of times when it felt it was in real crisis. For example, when things like the coming of sound and so forth. You went through that as well, because like not that many directors, you're one of the very few directors who worked from the silent period right forward into the sound period, made the adjustment easily. Did you have much difficulty yourself when the sound period
No,
came?
I thought it was a wonderful tool that was handed to us, sound. And having had a technical education, having graduated from Caltech as a chemical engineer, the technical side did not worry me. I knew what a microphone was, I knew what a light valve was, and everything else. But it did throw the top executives in Hollywood for quite a while. This talk about decibels and things like that just threw them. And many strange things happened in that transition from silent to sound. But the wonderful part of it is that that transition happened only really in a year and a half it was over with. But film still kept being produced. The theaters didn't close down. We went from silent to one stage was for sound. I got that ready. Silent pictures being made over here as the stages are being converted. And there was quite a bit of conversion to do. the theaters especially, they all their proscenium arches had to be dug out, and microphones, not microphones, but loudspeakers we put on their speakers. An awful lot of magic boxes and black cables had to be put in. There was a great deal to do with the theaters. All the projection machinery had to be changed. So there was an enormous amount of work to be done, not only in the studios and converting from silence to sound, but in the theaters themselves. And it all happened in about a year and a half, without a break in as far as the theater was concerned. Without a break in the box office, let's say.
You were doing the films. Let's see, right around the. You were with Columbia.
Still with Columbia, yes.
Mm-hmm. And you, of course, you stayed with Columbia all the way during the 30s, pretty much,
yes.
all the way to the very end.
Right through 1939. Yes.
Helping to put the studio on the big map, so to speak, I guess, at that time. You started doing social comedies fairly early, right after sound, whereas most of your silent films tended to be either action films or the comedies of Harry Langdon or something like that. Isn't that right?
Yes, I think it was after it happened one night that I shook that Oscar tree and got all 5 Oscars for the 5 major Oscars for that silly little comedy, and I thought, well, I began to get some real respect for this craft. Up to that time, I was just trying to make money and trying to get a name, trying to win an Academy Award, just trying to line my pockets really. But then after that, it struck me what a powerful, wonderful medium this was, film. Nobody's ever had that power before. No saint, no sultan, no potentate of any kind, no writer, no artist. The power that is given to a filmmaker to speak to hundreds and hundreds of millions of people for 2 hours and in the dark. Nobody's ever had that power to influence. And this, it dawned on me that the magnificent, this wonderful medium, this wonderful gift called film, in which you could express yourself, one person, to really hundreds of millions of people all over the earth. So that started me thinking about, well, maybe as well as in making them laugh, I might stick in something I might want to say, make some social comment. And Mr. Deeds Goes to Town was the first picture that I ever, on purpose, tried to say something about society. The rest of the time I probably had, but because when you are making your own film and you have a complete control of your own film, yourself escapes into that film. Each film becomes really a chapter in your own autobiography, providing you are allowed to express yourself. So I was probably making social comments without knowing it, but with the film Mr. Deeds Goes to Town, I tried knowingly to make a social comment. And from then on, I put as much attention on whatever comment I was trying to make as I did to the entertainment. And yet I never forgot that what I was doing was theater. I wasn't selling religious tracts or political tracts and asking people to pay their money to hear me spout about religion or about politics. I knew that the films were theater. And first of all, they must entertain, must uplift, titillate, excite, just as a theater should do all those things. And entertainment was the number one, for me, was number one motivation in making the films. But at the same time, even with entertainment, I still could possibly say something about the contemporary hang-ups that we had in society and in politics and everything else. And that combination of humor and social comment and satire, perhaps, seemed to work out fine as far as I was concerned.
Mr. Capra, you're talking about your popularity and after you made a name for yourself after the Academy Awards and the social comment. When it got to the point of Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, you premiered that film in Washington, and that was before anyone else had seen it. Did you preview that one?
We previewed that one, yes. The previews were excellent.
Okay,
with the people.
Right.
But when we got to Washington, we got away from the people. We got to the politicians, and they're a different breed. particularly the press people from in Washington. They were real. They had bylines. They wore cufflinks. They had collars and things, and they were kind of way uppity people in the journalistic world, far above the normal reporter. These pundits that were in Washington, and when they saw Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, it just astonished them and angered them no end, on two counts. One, that I dared make a film about their own preserves, Washington. Another one that I showed that reporters get drunk. This was they objected to that violently, and they objected with martinis in their hands when they objected. So we had a terrible time. My wife and I were really chased out of Washington because of that film, and we had other repercussions about it that were really proved to me the power of film. And I think what those newspaper men, they were so angered at the film, not so much that they angered at the film or at me, but they were angered at a new medium of expression, which scared them, which frightened them, a thing called film power, which then, in a sense, just would overshadow their press power, as it has. It's a much more powerful medium than the press. And I think they felt it for the first time when we came in and made a film about their own little preserves, about the Washington scene. And they saw this film and they felt, aha, we've had it. And I think that's what angered them more than it did the film itself.
What about outside the country? What did the politicians think of international distribution, the way it would look to other countries?
Well, we had a very tough role with that thing, because the film that Mr. Smith Goes to Washington was released at the same time that Hitler attacked Poland. Here was the whole world burning up, and here was a dewy-eyed freshman making a hell of a lot of fuss in the Senate about a little thing called graft. And many people objected violently to pointing out our own faults in our democracy at the time when the Nazis were saying that democracies cannot exist because they're decadent and so forth. And this is what produced all the problems. We had an ambassador in London, in the court of St. James. His name was Mr. Joseph Kennedy, the father of all the wonderful Kennedys. And he wrote a very, very long, urgent cablegram to us with copies of the White House and to Congress, asking us please not to show the film in Europe because it would hurt the Allied morale. It would be construed as Nazi propaganda and all this kind of stuff. And here was objection from on high. Here was an objection with an official clout. We had to listen. And I worried for a while. I said, what have we made here? Is it really so bad as that? I certainly was not going to be a party to hurting our Allied cause or hurting the cause of democracy in general, but I just could not take any kind of a politician or any kind of an officialdom telling us what we could show and what we could not show. I objected very violently to any form of censorship, and certainly this kind of pressure from political. The pressure was so much on this film that the major companies of Hollywood, the 5 big major companies, put up a fund of $2 million to buy the film from Columbia and shelve it, burn it. The film cost $1,600,000, and therefore Columbia would come out with a nice profit, $400,000, by just burning the film. And they had to think about it. And I must give them a lot of credit, and I must give myself a lot of credit, because I certainly banged all kinds of doors and told them they should never do a thing like that, because once they did that, they never could again hold their heads high. And so they refused to do that, and we did show the film in Europe, and it did not hurt the Allied cause. because 2 or 3 years afterwards, after that, I was in uniform in the Army, and I got a batch of clippings from my wife, and among the clippings was a clipping from Vichy, France, from France, in which the Germans had given the Vichy people, Vichy France, the occupied part of France, 30 days to play Western films. After that, no more Western films, only German films after 30 days' time. So the owners of these French theaters went to their clients and said, what will we play? We got 30 days. Invariably, they asked for Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. And in one theater in the Vosges Mountains, in a very small village, the man played Mr. Smith Goes to Washington every day for those 30 days, and people came from miles around and whooped and hollered every time Jimmy Stewart began talking about freedom and liberty and things like that. And it certainly did not hurt any Allied cause at all. And certainly no time is inopportune to ring freedom's bell. It's always right to ring freedom's bell. And I just thought to myself, well, I guess we didn't make a mistake. I'm glad we opposed all that pressure. The film is not Nazi propaganda. It is a ringing affirmation of democracy. That's what I thought the film was. Boy, how did I get into all this?
It's a long question and a wonderful film. You found that the attitudes much changed, though, when you made State of the Union after the war, right?
Yes, I thought State of the Union was a much more biting satire against our own politics and how they nominated presidents and so forth. And I really thought, well, if they chase me up with Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, they'll hang me for this. And particularly so because they had invited Mr. Truman, President Truman, to the opening. And there were a lot of jokes in the film about Truman. But so help me, this little fellow, I had to meet him outside and everybody was in the theater. The theater was closed off, and I met his car, and I was shaking when I met him. And I escorted him in into the theater. And as we were walking through the foyer, the music began to play here, Hail to the Chief. And he looked around and said, I guess somebody's coming in, you know. A very cute man. And then we took him to a box. We sat him down, and then I waited for the explosions when the Truman gags came on. They talked about Truman on the film. And I'd go back once in a while to listen to this box, and the Secret Service man there kept saying to me, he loves it, he loves it. I go, how do you know? And he says, every time he likes something, he just bounces up and down like this. And, well, he did like it. He took the film to his presidential yacht, the Mayflower, I think it was called. Took a copy of the film there and showed it to his friends. And later on, one of his party managers, political man, said that the film really decided him that he should run again, even though his popularity was very, very low. And he won, and he ran and won. And I like to think if that film did help him make up his mind, then okay.
Mr. Capra, do you think that the budget restrictions at Columbia Pictures made filmmaking more exciting and challenging there?
Certainly more challenging, and in many cases, when budget limitations force you to use your ingenuity and use your merstand and challenge you to do things in a way that is cheaper and a way that maybe costs very little money. And surprisingly enough, many times the limitations bring out innovations that last forever, really. And I did not object to the limitations of Columbia budget because I knew that's all they could spend. I cussed many times, cursed the day I went to work for Columbia. But all I can say is that perhaps the limitations helped me in many times, and I could think of some simpler way to do it, and perhaps simpler and better and more entertaining way to do it.
Do you think that your career would have taken different directions if you had worked at MGM or Warner Brothers?
My career probably would never have gotten started had I worked in one of those studios where you couldn't have your own way. I resent authority in any name. I'm just one of those guys. I can't work if somebody tells me to do this, and I just wouldn't stand. I'd go off and do something else. Very luckily, I got started with Columbia.
Do you think there are any people left in the industry like Harry Cohn, head of Columbia, when you were there?
Not very many, no. Certainly our film profession could use men like Harry Cohn, who were primarily showmen. At the moment, most film companies are little orts and conglomerates, with oil and with steel and with everything else, and they're just treated as a corporate little entity, and perhaps they're treated the heads are corporate men with pencils. Well, film is a creative business, and it's difficult to put a form sheet on it, and difficult for businessmen to understand. And fortunately, there is a new group of young directors that have just come in the last year or two, who have made some of our greatest pictures right off of their first, second, or third time they made films. Very successful. People like Coppola, Bogdanovich, Friedkin, Lucas, and these are people who just came in the last couple of years, and they are graduates from film schools, I'll have you understand. And they're making tremendous box office films, great films, right off the bat. They've turned Hollywood upside down.
I believe we have a few questions from the audience now. Is there a question out there? Thought I saw someone hand forward. Yes, right up here in the front.
Mr. Capra, structurally, for me, some of the fascinating parts of the films are the exteriors, or what appear to be exteriors. I'm thinking about It's a Wonderful Life, where Jimmy Stewart is on the bridge, or in Meet John Doe, and Gary Cooper is on the top of the tower. Were those, in fact, studio shots, or did you do some location work?
We did location work wherever we could, and we did a great deal of location work. The street in with Wonderful Life that's a studio street, exterior but studio street. We shot it actually at night there. The bridge in Wonderful Life is a studio set inside, coupled with a conglomerate shot, process shots and things like that. What else did you ask about? Lost Horizon?
And John Doe.
In John Doe, that we shot in a baseball park, Wrigley Field. That took us 6 nights, and actual shooting at night with about 2,000 people each night. That we went right on location with it.
Was the town hall tower, was that on location, or was that reconstructed, the tower at the end of that film?
Which one?
The town hall tower where Gary Cooper is on the top.
That was at stage. That was staged, and we shot that in an ice house at 15 degrees in order to get their breath to show.
Thank you.
Question?
I was very curious about some of your earlier films in the 30s. If there were any political writings or theories that were behind them, for instance, in It Happened One Night or even Lost Horizon, there seems to be a theme such as man versus certain personal obstacles. At the end, the good person always gets what was justified to him, even in Meet John Doe, I think. Also, were there any political writings or anything that influenced your films?
No. I just suppose what it influenced me that I was born of a very poor family, and I had this great opportunity to get an education in the United States, and I felt a great love for this country and a great love for the people of this country, and I always have and always will, and I still do. And I think it was just this. These films that I were making were just my way of saying thanks, America. If you can understand that kind of a cliche. I love the democratic way of life. I love the freedom of America. I love the freedom of the Americans, and I suppose I love the American individuality and the American it never wanted to be conformed into any kind of a totalitarian state, and I love that very much. I love the individual. I think the individual is God's greatest creation. And all individuals are important to me. One of the themes that runs through all the way through my films is the importance and the divinity and the survivability of the individual.
Right. Well, I somewhat compare it to maybe some of Ayn Rand's works or something, objectivism.
I've read Ayn Rand for the first time last year.
Is that right? Well, may I just ask one other quick question? If you were to make a remake of any of your movies of the 30s, how would you change them as far as the social consciousness that exists now? For instance, I didn't get a chance to see The Lost Horizon, but I think the newer version, I think it sort of speaks for itself, that it could never be what the original was. Would you change your overtones any now, or?
I don't think so.
No.
I think it still be the idealist against the mass conformity in some way, perhaps in the idiom of the times, contemporary with the times, but that still would be my theme.
Thank you.
I was going to ask you, are there any directors that you would identify as having an important influence on your own work?
None. None. I didn't see a top director work until after I'd made it happen one night. And I got those Academy Awards, and I was allowed in the other studios for the first time. And I was dazzled, really, by what I saw. No, I was my own teacher, my own student. And so I developed my own style.
Do you consider yourself a comedy director, per se?
A comedy director?
Yes.
Yes. Yes, I consider myself a comedy director. Is that good or bad? I mean, I don't know.
Lost Horizon was known, among other things, for its special effects and its snow scenes. What kind of problems did you come across in filming those?
That's another film that Lost Horizon is a fantasy. A fantasy is a kind of tricky to bring credibility to fantasy. And in my own way, rightfully or wrongfully, I figured out that we had to have complete credibility at the beginning of the story. Everything we saw must be believable, so that the credibility and believability would carry over into the fantasy when we met it. If we were not too credible with our beginning, our known world, our known part of the film, I felt that it would hurt the credibility of the fantasy part of the film when we got there. So, in order to make that film credible, completely credible, as credible as the most realistic documentary, I wanted the breath to show when it got cold. Because if it got cold and had people shivering and no breath showing, and you're not cold. In order to get that effect, I went to an ice house, and we rented an ice house, and the ice house was full of swordfish. So we threw out the swordfish and brought in the actors, and we made a little studio out of this ice house, and we shot in that ice house for 6 weeks. About 20% of Lost Horizon was shot in that ice house at 15 degrees. We had a great number of problems because of the cold with our equipment, the oil, the static on the film, all that we had to contend with and find answers for. But we did get the cold, and we did get the snow, and we did get the ice and all that stuff that was cold. All that avalanche stuff where you saw the people, that was all done in the ice house. All the material in the plane, that was all done in the ice house. All the things outside the plane when it was wrecked, all the marching up to the top, all that trek to the top, that was all done in a very small ice house. And I'm telling you, it would have absolutely intrigued you to see what the kind of technology we resorted to get those shots. It was really brilliant. At one time, we had little screens behind we had 6 windows in the plane. Each window had its own little screen and its own little 16 millimeter projector. So we had back projection in front of every screen, so that we could move any way we wanted, pan any way direction we wanted, and there was the scenery going by of the Himalayan mountains. Yet it was bitterly cold inside that plane, 15 degrees. The breath showed beautifully, and you got this sense of cold reality. There is nothing that can can suggest cold more than people who are cold. Their noses are cold. They dribble. Their eyes are cold, and they try to talk. And the actors were all cold. And so we did, I think, accomplish reality before we got to this unreality of Shangri-La.
What did you think of the new version of Lost Horizon?
A couple of friends called me up the night it opened to me and said, "Don't go see it." And I said, "Oh, no," so I didn't go to see it.
Other questions?
Mr. Capra, you were much involved with the Film Academy in democratizing it and saving it, I believe, in the middle 30s. I'm just curious what you think the future of the Academy is and any particular improvements you could suggest.
I didn't get the last question.
I want to know what you think the future of the Academy is and any improvements you might suggest.
I don't know any way you can improve on the Academy. It's one of the greatest things that's happened. It's so good, nothing has been able to wreck it. All kinds of people have tried to wreck it, but it's just so necessary and so right and so true that nobody can touch it. It is right and true when you're 3,600 of your peers, people who actually work in film, actors, directors, cameramen, soundmen, vote for the best work of that year. Absolutely right that that should be so. And actually, absolutely right that it probably be the highest commendation, the highest accolade that can be paid anybody, is to be told by your peers, you are the best for this year. It's tremendous. Now, when that voting is honest, and when that voting is clean, and then everything is clean about it, nothing can be better than that. And anybody that doesn't accept an Academy Award, well, I have certain names that I can't mention on television for them, because they are insulting their peers. They're insulting all their fellow workers by some snide hint that perhaps the whole thing is corrupted. And I object very violently to those people, and so does everybody else. They get nowhere. They have no standing whatever. Believe me, anybody that gets an Academy Award, that is the most tremendous thing that happens in their life. Certainly was in my life and everybody else that I know of. It has great meaning, great worth, and great, if nothing else, it has great financial results.
Mr. Capra, you and John Ford used a lot of the same actors. I wondered if that was just coincidence.
John Ford and I were very dear friends, and we were a lot together. We saw each other a good deal, and we seemed to love the same actors. So therefore, in a sense, he was good for one picture a year. I was good for one picture a year, and we took care of these 5 or 6 or maybe many 7 or 8 bid actors that we knew that were just great, and they'd work. If they'd get work in 2 pictures a year, they were set, and that means they were taken care of for that year. So we had sort of this stock company: Tommy Mitchell, Ward Bond, a few others like that we used. Surefire actors we knew that would deliver whatever we could give them.
You seem to have been in on the beginnings of the careers, or at least that moment in the careers of a great many stars when they really made it, such as, well, first of all, I suppose the most obvious one is Clark Gable, but do you feel that that's really, well, I guess what I'm trying to ask is, do you think the director is ultimately the star maker, or do you think it's ultimately to be understood rather as something that happens in the front office or by producers and publicity men?
Oh, no, not by producers and publicity men, no. You can't make it. Stars are born, by the way. They're not made. There's there's no way you can unmake a star or make one. But in the case of a man like Gable, he would have been a star whether it happened one night or not. But it happened one night. Has its nice satirical moments, because we had to make that picture because Mr. Louis Mayer wanted to punish Clark Gable. He'd been a bad boy. He wanted more money. So we had to make the picture so, because it was, where I worked was Siberia for the stars of MGM. And when they wanted to punish somebody, they'd send them down to Poverty Row to work for somebody. And then they'd see how it was down there, and then be good boys, good people when they came back. Well, some punishment they got, Clark Gable. They had to triple his salary when he got back.
Are there other questions? I think we want to thank you, Mr. Capra. It's a rare privilege to have you here. There are only a handful of men who have proven themselves to be great masters of the cinema, and you certainly belong in that category. We want to thank you very much.
Well, that's nice to hear that. Thank you very much. Thank the audience. Thank you, all you young people.
Hooray for Hollywood, it's really